This next verse, verse 461, is part of a short sequence, and it's the third in this short sequence. So if you haven't watched the previous two videos, it might be a good idea to do so. And this little sequence, this short sequence of verses, is concerned with our situation, understanding our immediate situation, which is usually described as one of ignorance. And what this little sequence of verses is leading to is the intimate connection between this ignorance and enlightenment. But more about that later. Let's proceed with verse 461. The body is maintained by the Citta. The Manas always cogitates. The Mano Vijnana, together with the Vijnanas, cuts the world in pieces as objects of Citta. So this verse is concerned with the body, with the mind, and with the senses. And the first phrase here is somewhat startling. The body is maintained by the Citta. Now, Citta is a word which has got various levels of meaning, but here in the Lankavatara Sutra it's identified with mind with a capital M, or awareness with a capital A, or even enlightenment. Citta is what we're constantly endeavouring to turn to as enlightenment practitioners. It's the awareness which is hearing this. It's the awareness which is possibly watching the video of this. It's the awareness which is possibly lost in some thoughts as it's listening to this. It's this awareness which can actually control the body. I move my arm, my hand, and it moves. So I think this word maintained doesn't quite give the full flavour of it. I suppose you could argue it's body's maintained by the subconscious and so on, but that's out with our direct experience. We could say the body is under the supervision of the Citta. It gives me the only direct control I've got over what's going on. It's very limited control. Basically what I can do is I can move my limbs. That's assuming I'm relatively mobile, which at the moment I'm not. That assumes your body's working okay. I can close my eyes. I can hold my breath. I can flex various muscles in my body. I can direct the attention to various parts of the body. Purse my lips. Raise my eyebrows, and so on. So there's a few things I can do which actually give me a little bit of control over what's going on. It's extremely limited though, extremely limited. But this little amount of control, this limited amount of control, is tantalizing. Because I've got two hands, I can use tools, and through the use of tools get more control. Through the use of ideas I can perhaps get control over others. And this is the manas, the mind, which is always cogitating, it's always thinking. It's thinking about how to get control, get more control for the benefit of the ego. And it does this by seeing patterns in things, patterns in how things work, maybe scientific laws. We start understanding physical laws, or perhaps we're into luck and certain things. If we do certain things, we're lucky. If we do other things, we're unlucky. We make patterns. We come up for reasons for these patterns. We might believe in the gods, or our ancestors did, but now we put much of it down to scientific laws, and these scientific laws are patterns. Although many people might still resort to astrology and tarot cards and so on, because these are also about patterns. So the mind, the manas, is always cogitating, always trying to find patterns in order to construct some understanding of reality, so that we can have more control. And it does this by taking the evidence of the so-called senses. It is what's meant here by the Vijnanas. It cuts the world in pieces as objects of Citta, and these are objects of awareness. So we discriminate objects, and then we say that we're aware of these objects. So this is the world we normally inhabit. This is the world of our ignorance. It starts from Citta, which is that awareness which can, once the manas is sufficiently inclined, it can lead to an enlightenment event. But otherwise the mind is caught up in the objects of awareness, the objects of the discriminating awareness. So what's the alternative? The alternative is in the next verse. Verse 462. As thou reviewest the world with thy transcendental knowledge and compassion, it is to thee always like a dream, of which one cannot say whether it is permanent or destructible, as the category of being and non-being is inapplicable to it. Now, this verse might seem familiar. It is in fact a duplication of the very first verse of the Sagatakam, which was covered way back in video 4, which was entitled Compassion. And this is Mahamati describing the vision of the Buddha, but it's also the vision of the enlightenment practitioner. We need to move away from this idea of control. It's one that we do automatically. I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that this is what we're looking for. Even those people that get involved in the quest for paranormal or psychic powers, it's just the idea of control being dressed up. We want to be able to control things at a distance rather than just the limbs of our body, or do astral projection or something. It's all very fascinating, but it really is tied into this idea of control, and it's what fuels us. We feel quite impotent, really, so we look for control. Is this actually the case? Is this what actually is driving us much of the time? Well, I'll leave that for you to either agree or disagree with. But we've got an option here. We've got an alternative. Instead of reviewing the world in terms of how we can control it, we can review it with transcendental knowledge and compassion. And transcendental knowledge, sometimes called wisdom, is insight into our own ignorance. But instead of berating ourselves for our ignorance, which is what the ego likes to do. Be compassionate. Be compassionate to yourself. Be compassionate to your own ignorance. Let's step back from it all. Let's step back, at least for a short while, take a break from this compulsion to control. And let's be still. Be still even for a short while. Take a little holiday. And we can step back from the reality which everybody else seems to be engaged in. As we become more still, we're actually stepping back, and the world takes on all the relevance of a dream. This is what it is. We think we're awake right now, compared to being asleep earlier on. But at some point we're going to be dead. This reality will have dissolved completely. Everybody we knew, everybody we cared for, everybody we had a grudge against, all our thoughts of control are going to fall away, dissolve. So let's practice in advance of letting go of it all, letting go of the dream. And there'll be little objections coming in here about how solid, how permanent the world is. But this is how we feel in a dream anyway. We're in a dream, and that dream is real, it's permanent. But we know it's not permanent. We know this world is not permanent because it will dissolve at the point of death. You might argue, oh, it's still going to be here. People die and the world's still here. But that's an inference, that's a hypothesis, an assumption. At the point of death, the world dissolves, just as it dissolves when you fall asleep, and just as the dream dissolves when you wake up. So we're not concerned with ideas here. We're concerned with what actually happens. So we can't say it's permanent, but there's something going on. And I told you what I think is the most likely scenario after the point of death in a previous video. I think it was called After the Point of Death. There's always something going on. There is always something going on. Things don't stop. So it's neither permanent nor is it destructible. As the categories of being and non-being, as the category of being and non-being is inapplicable to it. It's just all going on, and we create stories about what is going on. Being is about coming into being with a history, and non-being is about things dissolving out of being. That's with the future. So we tend to see things rather as things which have just sprung momentarily into existence, as things which have developed. This is paper which comes from trees or something and will eventually possibly end up as dust. So we give it a timeline, we see things in terms of their timelines. This is what being and non-being is about. But what is really happening is Just as in a dream, things are springing into consciousness from moment to moment, complete with the backstory, with notions of their own timeline. Step back from that. Step back from that. Step back from the notions of things with timelines. Step back into the understanding that, like a dream, everything is spontaneously arisen. As I've pointed out in previous videos, this is the scientific understanding when it really gets down to it. But let's be still and divest ourselves of all that weight, the weight of history, the weight of the future, the weight of notions of permanence. Just come back to our own sense of being, this very awareness which supervises the body and which can lead into notions of control. But we won't go there for now. Let's just come back to the awareness which is hearing this. Breathe out all your tensions. And be still in this awareness, this simple awareness. Which holds, which contains the whole universe and more.